Gary's going to be doing a demo to show us Kickstart UI progress. So I will stop sharing my screen so you can take over.
Cool. Thanks, Nancy. For folks who I have not chatted with yet, my name is Gary. I'm a product designer at VMware, working with the TCE team on all things interfaces, so things like our CLI and, of course, the UI that I'm going to be walking you all through. I'll start to share my screen. So a bit of context. We've taken a lot of the feedback over the past couple of months and consolidated them into an effort that we're calling Tanzu UI. And we're building a plugin that will enable this kind of UI experience for managing clusters, provisioning workload clusters, and viewing clusters from TCE. And one of the goals that we're striving towards is really provide the on-ramp and onboard experience that feels TCE-like. I can only describe it as a vibe in which we're striving towards, in which we want to give people the sense of what it means to be using Tanzu from an open source perspective, but also give them an ease into all the functionality and concepts that we are kind of advocating with TCE. So I'm going to step you through a few, one particular flow with provisioning the management cluster, but I'm also going to point out a few things that are of interest for you all. And starting here, where we have a welcome page, we're looking to surface content that is relevant for folks to understand what is Tanzu Community Edition, along with documentation and things just to get folks up to speed as to what we're going to be going through with creating clusters and working with our workload clusters. From here, oh, by the way, this is all kind of work in progress. So all the copy and kind of text that you see here is definitely kind of things that are in the spirit of what we're hoping to communicate, but definitely a lot of work to be done around refining and iterating on what I'm presenting here today. But the core thing here is to get started. From here, you're presented with two flows in which you can create a management cluster and a workload cluster. And we also have introduced this side panel where you're able to jump into those particular workflows and also view the clusters that you've created using TCE. So I'm going to jump into create management cluster here. Really familiar screen. We're giving you the affordances or listing of all the providers that you're able to deploy the management cluster to. For the workflows that we've been thinking about, we've been starting with AWS. Of course, this, we're hoping to apply the same patterns across things like vSphere and Azure. So click on create cluster. And here is something that we've been really digging into for the new experience is how do we make the steps and amount of inputs that a user will need to provide really clear and understandable. So this is a reimagined kind of layout and information architecture where we're parsing out the major moments in the installation step. Here we start with providing credentials, and then we step through to cluster settings, regions, configuration, and a summary page in order to kind of get a sense of what exactly is happening as you're provisioning the management cluster. Pattern to that kind of persists across all of these moments is this advanced settings, which will enable you to kind of peer into more advanced kind of fields and selections in order to really fine tune the deployment. But from here, we're going to be surfacing the initial step of authenticating with the provider that you're looking to deploy to. So click on connect. From this point, providing cluster name, but also kind of taking stock of the complexity that comes with node type selection here. So for those who are familiar with the AWS flow, you might have been familiar with the node type selection dropdown and all the numerous options that you get from that dropdown. And so we're looking to provide a little bit of guidance here in terms of what kinds of workload you're looking to deploy onto the cluster by having this kind of curated, lightly kind of opinionated set of kind of instance types that will be mapped to the provider that you've selected. For those who are looking to get more specific around what instance types they're looking to deploy, they could click on the advanced settings and you get this advanced settings area where you're able to do some further refinement and maybe even kind of be more specific as to what kinds of instance types you want to provision the control plane cluster with. But for now, we're going to go back to our not advanced settings state. And then from here, we have our AWS regions, our AMI, OS image, EC2 key pairs. We've moved away from the development versus production instance type profiles that you might have seen with the Bootstrap UI. Instead, we've kind of started exploring this idea of availability zones and be able to toggle additional availability zones as needed, and also providing a bit of guidance in terms of why you'd want to do this for your control plane cluster. From here, we have our consistent configuration that includes things like our cluster metadata, identity provider, proxy usage, and a few other things that I'm sure you all are familiar with from the original Bootstrap UI. And then we got a full summary, and this is going to output all of the options that we have inputted before. Are thinking that we won't provide all of the inputs here in this table format verbatim, but rather have some independent sections that we get the high level summary, but also some more specific configuration if you want to dig into that granular detail for this deployment. We also provide the CLI command equivalents here. So you're able to deploy the cluster using the Tanzu CLI from this point. But for this flow, we're going to click on Create Management Cluster. And we also made an effort to simplify the kind of provisioning screen that you see here. We've condensed the number of steps to be more concise, along with the logging output, and then also give a bit of guidance in terms of what a user could do now that they have the management cluster up and running, along with their ability to create the workload clusters from this point. Beyond this point, it gets a little bit fuzzy because this is like work in progress. So we're looking at workflows to support the creation of workload clusters from those management clusters in the UI, along with some capabilities for viewing the clusters that you've provisioned already and the relationships between the management cluster to workload clusters, and be able to delete, get context, and create additional workload clusters from that context. Yeah, so that's kind of where we are at now. There is the GitHub proposal issue, which kind of articulates what I just showed here, but also we're collecting feedback from that issue. So more iterations for sure over the next couple of weeks, and we're very much looking forward to hearing you all kind of talk about and get stoked for this UI concept that we're hoping to deliver. Yeah, happy to answer and talk about this initiative.
Awesome, Gary. Like, how cool is that, everyone? That is so freaking cool and super exciting to see. I imagine folks have questions, comments. Jorge, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, was wondering, since with this Start UI, you can provision management of workload cluster. Is it going to be like another plugin, or will it be integrated from within the existing plugin somehow?
I could take this. Yeah, this would be a net new plugin. If you think about the current user experience of launching the existing Kickstart UI, it's very specific to management cluster creation and its own syntax. So the idea here is to have a dedicated UI plugin.
Okay, so my feedback is this is awesome. And also amazing how fast you guys turned this around. Like, Justin, was it like just 2 weeks ago that you were saying there was a proposal for this? And then now 2 weeks later, we have a really nice, I mean, I know it's not finished, but it's a lot further along than I expected in 2 weeks. My only request is I would love to see as the next flow that you tackle is unmanaged. I think unmanaged is really important, especially for getting new users on board. Because it's the cheapest and quickest way we can get people to start playing around with TCE. So seeing that, and that actually should also help you with what a workload cluster should somewhat look like too, because it's a very similar flow. That's just my only request, but I love the work. Let me know when I can beta test, because I'm super excited to try, or alpha test, or, you know, first working thing test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Steve, I actually have a question for you. Would you imagine wanting to use the UI to create an unmanaged cluster?
I might, if I was a new user who liked GUIs, and I didn't like CLIs, and so we could say that. The other reason I might like a UI is if I'm spinning up a lot of unmanaged clusters internally, and this gave me the ability to see all the unmanaged clusters I have locally. I might, if when I'm done spinning it up, there was something that this UI allowed me to interrogate about the unmanaged clusters. I would have to, like, you know, like if it actually somehow neatly flowed into some, here's the management cluster we just spun up, unmanaged cluster we just spun up, and here's the link to its portal or something like that, so that I could start looking into my cluster right away. Other than that, no, especially if I mean, of course not for CI/CD stuff and all that other stuff, but as a new user, I could see at a new user or a workshop, this would be a very nice way to walk people through how to do it.
Perfect, good. Yeah, there was just some discussion about that, so it's great to hear some actual feedback. Thanks.
So, Sean, as far as I understand from Josh, managed clusters will eventually be able to integrate with more providers other than Kind, right? So when you look into a managed clusters being provisioned on any of these cloud infrastructure, obviously it makes a lot of sense to have similar UI, because then we get into all the complexities of provisioning, understanding the infrastructure for an unmanaged cluster, which probably will be like a dummy user like me doing provisioning clusters and stuff. And the other thing that I will add to Steve is that one of the workflows that I, the same as him, probably would love to see eventually is guided experience to deploy a set of packages that will give me a working cluster that I can use. Because right now, fine, I get a TCE cluster, but then you need to deploy a lot of things on top. And when you look into the packages that we provide, they are really complex to understand how to properly configure and provision, and especially when you combine multiple of those.
Oh, that does remind me of another piece of feedback I wanted to give to Gary about the choosing your profile screen. I am disappointed in that screen, though. I thought when I had originally seen that, I thought that was going to be, you were going to install a set of plugins that gives me like a developer cluster, or like it had a whole bunch of stuff pre-configured. But this doesn't help me that much in terms of compute type, really. I'd rather actually wait for this kind of stuff until we get the stuff Kartik's working on meta packages done. And then this is when I choose a meta package. And then based on the meta package I choose, you could make suggestions about what hardware you might want. But in terms of this is not that helpful right now. This takes up a lot of space compared to what I think the value it actually brings, given what it brings. That's all. But I do agree it's confusing picking all the different types, but I would actually just put a link to the Amazon instance types page or something instead.
Josh, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just want to say on the packaging side, we definitely hear you all. There's larger product conversations going on around exactly what domain should own the package installs and all that stuff. So totally heard, agree it needs to be there. I would love to hear more about if this instance type approach is problematic in the proposal. One of the things that we have observed with end users is that when you drop down in the existing Kickstart UI, the amount of AC2 instance types, there's about 77,000 of them. And it's really confusing to understand and reason about what's going to be adequate for your use case. So going from 77 options and or a reference to docs to 5 known working options that go slightly towards what you're preferring, be it compute or memory, seemed compelling to us. If that doesn't feel compelling, though, I'd love to hear in the proposal from folks, because this is certainly a decision we could turn around if need be.
Yeah, can you, I won't talk about it now, but can you link to the proposal just again, just so I can open it up rather than go dig?
Yeah, I've got it in chat. I'll link it again too.
Thank you.
You got it. Thanks.
If I have time, just to answer one of your questions related to this instance type. One thing that I just noticed is that you're selecting instance type for management cluster, and you are like talking about the usage that you are going to give into a management cluster, which I'm not an ops guy, but I pretty much understand that management clusters, they are just there to be able to create clusters. So like storage optimized, memory optimized, compute optimized. I don't know whether that much makes a lot of sense for management cluster. It does for workload, obviously, but then for workload, you specify some type of what you are going to be doing, the instance type, but then you get to the regions, and that regions to me, it seems like they're really complicated. The fact that you need to understand whether you want to use one A set or 3 A sets. I mean, I know that already because I've been working with this a long time, but as a user, I would really not understand that it means that I'm going to deploy 1 node or 3 nodes. The fact that I'm selecting 3 A sets, right? So that is probably something that needs to be better described. The fact that the A sets means the number of nodes that you are going to be defining, because what if I want 6 nodes? How many A sets do I need to use? 6? I guess not. So.
Yeah, I think that's really good feedback. If you can put that in the proposal too, Jorge, we definitely need to rethink tab 2 with regards to the context of a management cluster, because you're absolutely right. These are more focused on decisions you'd make based on workloads you're going to run. Get this feedback in the proposal. We super appreciate it. The line we're balancing here as we all try to reason about this is like, how do we give a simplified known good path? Because so many people are just trying to get started and failing, but still give enough knobs, right? So, especially like Jorge's feedback and your feedback, Steve, let's capture that in the proposal, and then keep that kind of balancing act in mind here. And long term, this will be completely cohesive, where it's like, there'll be really easy ways for you to drop down into the more intense knobbed configuration with all the settings for the advanced user. But at least initially, we want to think like, exactly to your point, Jorge, like, how could it be just so wicked clear as you're getting started that you make maybe 2 to 4 choices, and then a management cluster gets spun up without there being 6 failures in between your initial try and your final try. So thanks for the feedback, everyone.
If I could also, solicit feedback for one other pattern that we're working around, it would be for, I think, step 4, right? So to Josh's point, what we're trying to do is include like a reasonable set of defaults, really simplified basic workflows for user to, successfully deploy a management cluster. And then we have these other common configurations like cluster metadata or proxy settings, right? And these are more optional configurations. We're not, I guess, we're kind of like walking a fine line between whether these are considered advanced settings or just additional kind of like, asynchronous optional configurations that could be applied to your cluster. So if anyone has any feedback or thoughts that they can add to the proposal on, like, whether they feel that these optional configurations should be part of advanced settings for certain steps, or if they kind of deserve their own area or like kind of catalog of optional configurations, that would be helpful too, because I think we've kind of gone back and forth on this one a little bit internally.
Anything else regarding this piece?
Work in progress. I think we're going to continually kind of share updates as we move along with this initiative, but I really appreciate everyone's feedback so far.